There's a moment in the Dallas Marathon. You know, Texas is pretty flat, so there's not a lot of hills and stuff. Thank God. But there's a moment where you have to go around this lake, which is also really flat. It's White Rock Lake. It's like 5 miles just to go around the lake or something like that. Maybe more, it might be 7 or something like that. But that's kind of in the middle-ish of the marathon. And then you get to the end of the lake, and there's this one spot where there's one hill going up before you continue on with the rest of the marathon. And it's just a killer. So like on the way down to the lake, you go down that hill. And then after the lake, you have to go back up. But it's right at the point where you're like, you know, almost running as far as you've ever run before. When I was going down the hill, the guys who were like the pros who were like running the marathon actually to win, were like sprinting up the hill. You know, and when I got to the hill, I couldn't run at all, so I had to walk up. But all that is just to say, keep persevering. You know, one step at a time, one meditation at a time. When tiredness sets in, go back to that first meditation on Moses, you know, raising his hands in the battle of prayer, just persevering, letting God work, putting ourselves there so he can do his thing in us. In this meditation, we are going to consider the two standards. It's one of St. Ignatius's classic meditations, and we're continuing to seek the ability to make a firm decision with determination and with all of our will without wavering, overcoming our sorta kinda attitude. I follow Christ sorta kinda. So he asks us to ask ourselves this question of this truth that we're in the midst of a huge battle, and the battle is for my soul, and what are we going to do in that huge battle? You know, to save my soul is only in the power of Christ, but I have been given this terrible, fearsome ability to reject him, or to choose the other way, or to grow slack. And it's strange, you know, for people who have chosen to give their lives to Christ. When we look back at the past year, we can say, how many times have I not truly chosen to follow Christ? Or how many times have I chosen something else, my selfishness? So there's still something wrong in my life. There's still something wrong in our lives. And we definitely need to renew that decision of what side we're on. What side are we on? In reality, this is another meditation about holy indifference, about reaching that point where I'm totally free in my spirit to not seek at all my own whims or anything else other than Christ, his will, and serving him and loving him. The battle is in your mind and in your heart. It's a battle for your will. It's a battle for your decision. So remember that meditation from this morning of Jesus on the beach and Peter. You know, we know that Peter wasn't all the way there yet. He wasn't perfect yet. He wavered many times. Look back on my life and see that I wavered many times as well. When will I be able to look back on my life and say, that was the moment when I made the decision, when I made a firm decision, and when I chose to be on Christ's side more than ever before. So ask God for the grace that will be today. Today will be the day that I decide better and more firmly than I ever have before. I think the best image for this meditation is from Lord of the Rings. That great final battle scene. You know, after the big battle at what's the name of that castle? Can't remember. Anyway, it's after this one battle, they barely win. They decide, well, if we don't have enough forces to actually hold them off anymore, they're going to come and attack us with a huge army. We know that Frodo has the ring and that he's somewhere. And if he's about to destroy it, all he needs for us is to create a diversion. So all of the forces of goodness united in this one little wee army go up to the gates of Mordor and stand outside and start making a lot of noise. And the gates of Mordor open. You know, right? And the immense, huge army of the forces of evil start pouring out and just like go around them and surround them. And there's this great overhead aerial view. It's probably all CGI, but anyway, of this little wee army in a circle in the middle of the field and surrounded by evil. I like this image because it represents the importance of being under the right banner. And that's today's meditation. Choosing which banner you're going to be under. It doesn't really matter what happens in the end, as long as at the moment of the end, you're standing under the right banner. As long as you've got the right jersey on. At that moment, Frodo and Sam are like climbing up the mountain. There's that great scene that they've made many memes about where Sam says, "If I can't carry it for you, I'll just carry you." And he picks him up and carries him up the mountain. And then they get there, and Gollum is still following them because he still wants the ring. And Frodo's about to destroy it. And then he gives in to the temptation. And he turns around and says, "No, Sam, I'm going to keep it for myself." And he puts it on and disappears. And at that moment, Gollum jumps on him and grabs him. And all you see is Gollum floating around in the air because Frodo's invisible. And he bites off his finger. It's the best. It's the best. And Gollum is thrown down into the fire. And the ring is destroyed. Just like in Lord of the Rings, there's this sacrificial individual who has to enter. I love that image. Enter into the center of evil, the source of evil, and destroy it from within. It's a great image of Christ in his death, entering into the place where evil resides, into death itself. And I don't know if you've heard of Father John Riccardo. He talks a lot about the kerygma, and he has a great representation that he developed of the kerygma. But he says that Christ is like a, what they call it, an ambush predator. So you have certain types of creatures, like certain spiders, that disguise themselves and hide and wait for their prey to come along. And then once their prey is close, then they pounce. So they'll disguise themselves as something that looks good, and then once the innocent little creature comes along, they get him. So that's his image for Jesus. It's like Christ hides himself in a body and in death so that he can destroy the devil from his hiding. When he dies, Christ is not the weak one who's being defeated. He's the predator. He's the one who's doing the attacking. He's the one who's destroying the enemy through his death. It's a pretty good twist. So, how do we get onto that? We want to be under the right banner. So we're living in between those two moments of Lord of the Rings, right? Where there's the battle happening out on the field and where the victory is actually won. So once the ring is destroyed, the battle continues for a little bit, but the forces of evil are just falling apart. It's kind of like that. In our case, in Christ, the victory has already been won. The victory has already, he's already defeated the enemy, but the enemy is still there, still flailing about, trying to destroy as much as they can before they're all destroyed. And what do we need to do? We need to stay on his side. So what St. Ignatius asks us to do is to imagine this whole scene. Imagine Christ on one side with his banner and his army, and all the things that Christ stands for, which we've already named, and which hopefully you contemplated when we did that meditation on the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount. Christ stands for a lot of things that are tough, but it's all holy and it's all good. He stands for love, self-sacrificing love. And the enemy stands for all of those things that he promises you, comforts and joys and fun and, being awesome, right? St. Ignatius puts these things in order, but pride is always the worst. Pride is always the last one. So you've got comforts, you've got the vain honor of the world, and finally pride. So we need to reject all those things. But the devil's trying to make you want to be the best. It's trying to make you want to be independent and strong and kind of receiving praise from others. That's what he offers you. Whereas Jesus offers you, being beaten sometimes, being defeated, being the weakest or the last or the one who's hated the most. Christ offers poverty, he offers simplicity, he offers being forgotten and being humble. So St. Ignatius says, imagine the scene. I love what he puts here in the meditation on the two standards. The first point is to imagine as if the chief of all the enemy is seated himself in that great field of Babylon, as in a great chair of fire and smoke, in shape horrible and terrifying. Sounds kind of like it's out of Lord of the Rings, but a great chair of fire and smoke. So you've got to compare the two. And then he says we should try to imagine the speech that the devil gives to the ones he's inviting to go and fight for him, and all the promises he makes them. You probably noticed that candidates watching a movie the other night. It was Nefarious. Don't know if you've heard about it. Nefarious is it's about this guy who's on death row. He's about to be executed that day, actually, but he's possessed. So they want to send in a psychiatrist to analyze him. He has to sign off on him being being sane. So he's got to say this person has enough right judgment to have committed all the crimes that he committed, and therefore we can kill him, right? That's what they want him to say. But he sits down in front of this guy. He's an atheist. He sits down in front of this prisoner, and the prisoner starts telling him that he's a demon, named Nefarious. The guy he's possessing is named Edward. So every once in a while he snaps out of it and Edward starts talking, and it's really clearly two different people. But obviously the psychiatrist thinks that he's just got split personality disorder or something like that, and he won't believe it at all. So it's really good. But throughout, basically the whole movie is like a conversation between the two of them, and there's a point where Nefarious explains to him the whole strategy, the whole plan, and how they came to be devils, how they came to rebel against God, and how they want to destroy humanity. Now, I thought that was interesting. It's an interesting concept, but a defect of the movie is that it doesn't really represent the way that the devil works in our lives normally, right? If you know a little bit of the discernment of spirits of St. Ignatius, you know that when you're doing wrong, the devil doesn't try to make you feel wrong about it right away. He usually tries to make you feel that it's okay to do wrong. Oh, don't worry about it. You're okay. That's his tactic. So that's what we want to kind of contemplate is what does he say? What's he trying to say to people to get them to be on his side? It's like, it's okay. You don't need to try so hard. You don't need to be that holy. I think that for religious priests, what he often tries to do is he's not very often going to try to deceive a priest into doing something which is horrible and scandalous. He'll try to convince us just to be mediocre, just to be satisfied with, living my life in my vocation, but with a lot of comforts and stuff. Evil wins because good people do nothing. You see, I was struck by this. This spring, we got invited to a priest's barbecue with all of the diocesan priests up in Hamilton, in our deanery, and the bishop was there and stuff. And I was sitting at a table with a number of other priests, and some of them were older priests, and some of them were younger priests, but they all had this common experience that they were sharing with me of certain priests who lived their life in a pretty relaxed way, and they were telling different stories about experiences they had. They make jokes about it, like, oh, if you want to hide his bravery from him, put it in the confessional, because he'll never find it. I'm like, whoa, I've never heard that joke before. Thank God I never heard that in the Legion before. And I never thought that you'd have a priest who, didn't want to go to the confessional, didn't want to be there to forgive people's sins, or priests who would be notorious for never answering the pager for the hospital, or for always delegating that to their associate pastor instead of being the one to go out and visit the hospital, which could be understandable, in a merciful light. Maybe they're really busy and they've got other things to do. But it's shocking that the devil can tempt people who have given their lives to God to live a life that is comfortable. And you do see that even in religious life, even in legionary life. I love having my fancy clothes. So, I can always get permission if I convince my superior, and maybe I arrange my apostolate in such a way that I get certain benefactors so that I can always get the fancy clothes that I want, we know that having distinguished clothes is not evil, but we've got to be careful that we don't fall into loving the world or putting those things first in our lives. Apparently there was another priest who would manage to get all the essentials done in his work every day by noon, so that every afternoon he could go and play a round of golf. Like, whoa, man, if I had every afternoon free, all the things I would do. But that's one of the things to contemplate, is how the devil's proposal under his banner can trickle into our lives. Part of this meditation is exposing all of that, saying, look, even look at your own list of sins from your general confession. Look at what happened to me in the past year and the different ways that his lies trickled into my life. I'm not going to tolerate that anymore. I'm not going to play with, every once in a while slipping under his banner. It's actually a battle, and I've actually got to stay committed to my side. I can't waver in my decision. Sometimes our temptation might be that temptation of pride, to want to be the greatest or the first or the leader or the winner all the time. Like, when I share my homilies online, sometimes I think maybe I could be the next Father Mike Schmitz. First of all, it's never going to happen. But what's Christ's proposal? What's he proposing under his banner for me? What's the greatest ideal? What's Christ's dream for me? It's not for me to be the most famous or to get all the glory, or for me to be, someone who can be proud of what he's done. And you might be like, okay, well, why is Christ so bent on misery? Why does he want poverty so much? Why does he want humility so much? But really, Christ's secret plan is glory. His secret plan is that idea of reigning with him and being on the throne with him in the end. Sharing in the life of the Trinity. There is nothing greater than sharing in the life of the Trinity. That's what he promises us. It's through the paradox of the cross and through the path of suffering. But it's beautiful. Okay, one last thing. At the end of this meditation, St. Ignatius invites us to do 3 colloquies, one with Mary, one with Jesus, and one with the Father. And he says to do the same thing for all 3. But what he wants you to do is ask Mary to get for me the grace from her Son, that I may be received under his standard, and first in the highest spiritual poverty, and if he wants, also in actual poverty, and second in suffering, injuries, to imitate him more in them. You're asking Mary for the grace to have poverty and sufferings. And then you're supposed to ask Jesus the same thing, and you're supposed to ask the Father the same thing. So asking each of them, give me the desire for whatever is going to make me a faithful servant, a faithful follower of Christ under his banner. Give me a strong and firm desire for all of those things, whatever it may be, that will help me to live fully as a member of his army.